Super. All right. So from last time that we had, from the last time we had reviewed on Wednesday, we had started this golden ticket review, just kind of a comprehensive review of some of the most important ideas from Unit 2. Again, Unit 2 is the nuts and the bolts of the government. It's checks and balances, the job of each branch. We have a couple of cases in there. We have a couple of documents, like the Fed papers would fit mostly into Unit 2. And so that's kind of where we're at. So from last week, then we had covered, it was mostly legislative and executive branch stuff. And that's where we had left off, was talking a little bit more about the presidency. And so again, I will share this with you when we're done too. But anyway, so we're going to start tonight finishing up executive branch, getting more into judicial branch, and we're going to try to go quick. So again, a blank government exists when the president of the United States or the POTUS and Congress are of different political parties. We call that a divided government. I'm not going to use the text box tonight just because I feel like had some issues getting it to load last time. So I'm hoping that that maybe my penmanship will be better tonight with the electronic drawing of the words. Yeah, sure. Here we go. Assuming that it loads. Well, we call that a divided government. Again, so if you have a Republican president and a Democrat-controlled Congress, we would call that a divided government would be the term we would use. Assuming that this will work, which right now it doesn't appear that it is. So divided, no. I don't know what's going on here. Anyways, we'll follow along at home then for now while I try to troubleshoot this. We call it a divided government. Again, we have president of one party, Congress of another. It's hard for them to get along. So thus they are a divided government. I am frustrated. Yeah. Undo that. Okay. So then continuing along here, again, divided government exists when the president and Congress are of two different political parties. Continuing along, I'm probably just going to go away from the draw feature. I'll print this off and share a copy with you guys online or something. Divided government exists when the POTUS and the president are of different political parties. Federalist blank argued that we needed a strong and blank executive. Which Federalist paper is about the president? What's the number?
70.
Fed 70. Yes, Fed 70 argued we needed a strong and what would be the other word that would fit there? Strong
Enthusiastic.
and enthusiastic. Do we have enthusiastic in there? I would argue that enthusiastic is good. Strong and I guess they'd probably say decisive in this case. Okay, using the word bank. Strong and decisive. The president can be blanked by the House, but only the Senate decides whether the president is removed. So what can the House do to the president?
Impeach.
Impeach. Yep. House has the power to impeach. Senate then hears the impeachment case and determines if they are guilty or not. Okay. All right. Let me see if I can get this thing off my screen. I don't know why it's here. There we go. Maybe that'll make this work the way I want it to work. Perfect. Okay, the bureaucracy. So then the bureaucracy is all of the executive agencies that fall underneath the president, right? That started with the Washington presidency when George created the Department of State and the Treasury and the Department of Defense and whatever else. To get a job in the bureaucracy, you have to qualify. So meaning the bureaucracy uses a blank-based system for employment. What's the word? Merit-based system, right? You have to be qualified. If you're a Domino's pizza boy, but you're best friends with the president's son, sorry, my man, no dice. You cannot be the Secretary of State. Yeah, so merit's the word here. A merit-based system for employment, which replaced the blank system from the past. Andrew Jackson was very guilty of this. Hired all his friends, even though they probably weren't qualified. To the victor go the spoils. The spoil system, right? When presidents used to just appoint their buddies because, well, they're buddies, right? Even that person might not have been qualified for that position. To the victor go the spoils. Okay. Iron triangles, then we are looking at the relationship between the bureaucracy, interest groups, and Congress. Okay. So often iron triangles can form a government, which are partnerships between the bureaucracy, interest groups, and well, I guess it could be an elected official. What do we have here? Committee, no. Executive, maybe. Anyways, iron triangles, we look at the relationship between Congress, the bureaucracy, and interest groups. Okay. The president can issue what's called an executive order, which carries the weight of law. Why do presidents use executive orders over law? What's the benefit of an executive order?
It's quicker. It doesn't have to go through Congress.
Right. It doesn't have to go through Congress, right? That whole build a law procedure it takes time, right? There's committee meeting, vote on this, vote on that, add this, add that. Like our procedure, our legislative process in Congress, it takes a lot of time. And so when the president does an executive order, it's probably because they feel very strongly about a certain subject area and they kind of just want to get it done quick. Okay. So we call that an executive order, which has the same effect as a law, but it's technically not because it wasn't passed by Congress. Congress does not really like that executive order power. Okay. Congress uses what's called its oversight power within the federal bureaucracy to hold blank investigations, to hold hearings and investigations, control their blank and their spending. Budgets and spending. Okay. So again, oversight power means that Congress, like they set the budget. Congress is like, think of the Congress as like your manager at work. If they're unhappy with the way you're doing something, they might call you in and they might meet with you about it. And that's an oversight function. And Congress holds that. So if Congress doesn't think the president's doing their job, they can call them in and make them answer some questions. Same thing with members of the bureaucracy, secretary of this, secretary of that, so on, so on. Okay. So Congress uses its oversight power with the federal bureaucracy to hold hearings and control their budget and spending, and reorganize an agency if necessary. An iron triangle is not the same as an issue network. An iron triangle has three interlocking groups working on policy. So that would be Congress, bureaucracy, interest groups, and a network consists of a wide range of people who debate policy and work for more than short-term gains. An issue network. Okay. So there you have a little bit on the bureaucracy. Getting into judicial branch. The federal courts make up the judicial branch. The three levels of federal courts are district, appellate, and this one. District, appellate, and the highest court in the land. It is called the Supreme Court. Okay. Or the SCOTUS. We have 9 justices. Why do we have 9 justices? Why not 10?
Because that's an even number, is my guess.
Number, right? Yeah, it's an even number. So when the justices have to make a decision on a case, having an odd number is beneficial because then they always have a majority, right? That's the idea with having 9. Could that number ever change? Could we ever have more than 9 justices?
Maybe. I suppose we could go to 11, 13.
I mean, sure. Go to whatever number. Who sets that number? Who decides how many Supreme Court justices we have?
It's Congress that sets it, isn't it? And president
Congress.
picks
Yep.
them.
It'd be Congress who sets the number. Yep. Congress sets the number. So I mean, we've had 9 for a very long time, since the late 1800s. There was a time though during the Great Depression where FDR made a big push as president to try to court pack, is what they called it. He wanted to get more liberal or Democrat. I mean, again, I know the judiciary is independent, but he wanted to get more judges that had similar political values as he did onto the court, so that so many of the New Deal initiatives would not be ruled unconstitutional. Okay. But we have 9. We have 9 Supreme Court justices. Okay. So the federal courts make up the judicial branch. The 3 levels of the federal courts are the district, appellate, and the Supreme Courts. The district level courts hear the most cases by far because they hold original jurisdiction. The appellate courts are where the parties go to appeal. Supreme Court's the highest court's mostly an appeals court. Okay. So there are 9 Supreme Court justices, and they are required to use the United States Constitution to guide their decisions in cases. Blank jurisdiction happens in courts the first time a case is heard, and that's original jurisdiction. Again, there are certain instances where the Supreme Court can hold original jurisdiction, but more times than not, it doesn't. I mean, the Supreme Court, if there's ever issues between states or issues involving like a foreign ambassador or something along those lines, they can hold original jurisdiction. But more times than not, it's going to be the district courts that have that. Okay. The Supreme Court's primarily used as an appeals court. All right, moving on. And we'll try to get you guys out of here in the next 10 or so minutes. Okay, blank jurisdiction happens when cases are heard on an appeal from a lower court. Blank jurisdiction. Use the word bank here. We're almost done here. Blank jurisdiction happens when cases are heard on an appeal from a lower court. What do we call that?
Is it just appellate?
Yeah, it's appellate jurisdiction. So again, most of the time, that's what the Supreme Court holds. Per the Constitution, the Supreme Court does have instances, where it does hold original jurisdiction, but more times than not, Supreme Court's just an appellate court. So yeah, whenever a case federally is appealed, we call that appellate jurisdiction. The thing about appellate courts that makes them unique is they get to decide which cases they take. So like, if you think of it this way, federal district courts, like the lowest level of the federal court system, they are going to hear the most cases. Okay. The circuit courts or the federal appeals courts, they're going to hear like the second most. The Supreme Court's going to hear the least. In a given year, there's probably 1,000 or more cases that are appealed to the Supreme Court. And I don't know if you remember, but the Supreme Court's going to take probably less than 100 of those. Okay. So like 10% or so of the cases that are appealed to the Supreme Court, and probably even less than 10%, are ever actually heard by the Supreme Court. Okay. So again, appellate jurisdiction happens when cases are heard on appeal from a lower court. The rule of blank decides if the Supreme Court will hear a case, the minimum number of justices must agree. It's called the rule of 4. I remember talking about that in class. Again, there's 9 Supreme Court justices. If 4 of them agree to take a case, that means the court will take the case. And I know you're thinking, well, that's less than a majority. I totally agree, but they will take the case. Okay. Again, it takes five justices to make a majority, like to decide on a case, but to actually take the case, if 4 of the 9 say, let's do this thing, they're taking it. Okay. So we call that the rule of 4. Decides if the SCOTUS will hear a case, the minimum number of judges must agree. The court's power, the Supreme Court's power, was boosted thanks to which of these cases? There's only one.
Marbury v. Madison.
Yeah, Marbury v. Madison. That's the most important one. And Marbury versus Madison created the power of judicial review. You make me proud. Okay. Questions on that? Anybody have a question on what judicial review is? It's the power of the Supreme Court to do what?
That they can't enforce laws, but they can only like say what they are, basically.
Right. Yeah, they can say what they are.
They overturn them.
They can overturn them.
Is that
Yeah.
unconstitutional?
Yeah. Yep. Yep. You guys are both pretty much right there. Yeah. I mean, it gives the Supreme Court power to decide what the law actually means and to like say this is not constitutional. So to a degree, both of you are correct. Thing I remember about judicial review, it's the power of the Supreme Court to rule laws or actions to be unconstitutional. Okay. So Marbury v. Madison is probably the most important one of all the cases ever. All right. Now we have some theories on what the Supreme Court should and should not do. Judicial blank argues judges must use the original intent of the Constitution in deciding cases. We call that judicial. It's judicial blank versus blank. Judicial. The term here is judicial restraint. Yeah, restraint. Thank you. You got it. Yeah, judicial restraint. Again, the Supreme Court has a lot of power in determining what laws actually mean. And so with that, the Congress especially would argue that the judicial branch should not try to go about like changing the interpretation of laws. They would say that's not the court's job. And so that they should exercise judicial restraint, that they need to rule based on what the law reads, how the Constitution reads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. On the flip side of judicial restraint, you have what's called judicial activism, where there are people that would say, hey, some laws are unjust, segregation, this thing, that thing, you name it. And so that's when the Supreme Court needs to step in and use this authority that it has more or less in determining what laws mean. So again, judicial restraint versus judicial activism. Okay. Supreme Court justices and all other federal judges serve. How long is their term?
Lifetime, isn't it?
Lifetime it is. Yep. Lifetime. Till they retire, resign, get impeached, die, etc. Fed 78 argued for an independent judiciary. According to Hamilton, why was the judicial branch the weakest of the three branches?
It doesn't hold the pen or the sword.
Yeah, no power of the purse and no power of the sword. Purse and the sword does not control the money, does not control an army. The purse and the sword. Said judges, their job is basically just to interpret what the Constitution means. They need to be removed from politics, which again has become very complicated to say the least in recent years. Remove them from politics, give them a lifetime term. They just interpret the Constitution based on their own understanding. All right, stop the share.